Welcome to the Winged Wheel Podcast. Here to talk all things hockey are your hosts, Brad Crisco, Ryan Hanna, and Evan Lobsinger.
It's about that time of year. We typically have a really good feel for when we have to go down to one episode a week. And, you know, as we were prepping for this episode, it was kind of just all looking at each other going, yeah. It all fell off a cliff real fast. The NHL did us no favors because draft, free agency, everything else was compressed into 2-3 episodes when it's usually double that.
It was 100-0 very, very quick.
Yeah. But hey, it's funny saying this right now, but the low news time of the year is a good time for everyone to take a break, and we still have stuff to talk about with the Red Wings, and who knows, maybe this goads Steve Yzerman into making a trade or making a move that pulls us right back into the studio midweek.
We're 80 days away from the start of the next season, by the way.
I know. The other day, Mel said to me, blah, 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 we have to plan this. It's already mid-July. And I looked at her. I said, never say that to me again, please.
That's disgusting.
To me, summer is just starting now.
I'd agree.
We blinked and June happened. In any case, the Winged Wheel Podcast isn't going away. It's just slowing down a little bit. So what's happening from here on out is we are going to be recording episodes once a week, our usual weekend time slot, unless something causes us to move it. Midweek episodes are going to be reserved for Patreon exclusive content, and those are bonus episodes that we record. It's not the same as overtime episodes. We usually kind of pick a topic, have fun. You know, in the past, we've done redrafts of previous draft years. We argue about the salary cap. It's a little bit more evergreen content, and it's a lot more laid back fun. And we actually have some other plans for Patreon exclusive content and off-season content for the Winged Wheel Podcast this year. But you're still going to hear us once a week with the big old caveat of if something happens, we'll be back. So we are tempting fate by doing this, but I think the timing is right.
When Yzerman trades Justin Hall and a second-round pick on Tuesday, do we record Wednesday? Because that's about all I would expect the rest of the summer.
We might have to record Tuesday night.
Hey, that works out for me better this week.
Yeah. In any case, welcome to the Winged Wheel Podcast, here to talk to you about all things Detroit Red Wings hockey, the world of the NHL, and lots more. I'm one of your hosts, Ryan Hanna.
I'm Brad Crisco.
And I'm Evan.
On this episode of the Winged Wheel Podcast, we are going to be talking to you about a few different topics. Michael Brandsegg-Nygard's path to the Red Wings. Is it going to be faster than expected? What's up next for him? Coming to training camp, does he have a spot with the Griffins? Could he, make magic happen and make the Red Wings? We'll talk about all of that. Seider and Raymond, as of July 14th, don't have contracts, and that's not nothing. So we're going to be revisiting that topic as we will throughout the summer, as long as it takes for those contracts to get done, what the holdup may be, what the contracts might look like, the risk of something going haywire, and more. We're going to be taking a look at the lineup, some small news about, would-be Red Wings that never happened, NHL news and topics before we get into overtime. Before all that, we want to let you know that this podcast is almost completely supported by our Patreon supporters, patreon.com/wingedwheelpodcast if you want to support the show. You get access to some really great benefits like our bonus overtime episodes, which record right after these main ones, where we answer any questions that didn't make the main show. We talk about hockey, not hockey stuff. We let loose, have fun. You also get access to the Patreon exclusive bonus episodes that are now going to post midweek or thereabouts, which are different than the bonus overtime. So those are going to be, again, that evergreen content, the one-offs, the redraft episodes, and a bunch of other fun stuff that we have planned for the summer. You also get access to our Patreon exclusive Discord, which is a fantastic community, and you're automatically entered into all of our giveaways. For example, we've given away 2 tickets to every Detroit Red Wings home game for the past 2 seasons, the vast majority going directly to our Patreon supporters. So again, patreon.com/wingedwheelpodcast if you want to join the Dub Club. Speaking of the Dub Club, it's probably high time we had Steve back on the show. It's been a little while.
He's going through it today.
Do I even dare ask why this time?
I just saw, again, in the days of there's not a lot going on, so the Twitter content gets weird. Someone pointed out that the 17-year-old Spaniard that's taking over the Euro Cup was born right when Steve started doing his LFRs.
Oh, my God.
Oh, no.
And they're still running back the same lineup. Here we have Steve Dangle on the show. Steve, what's it like to run it back? He's going to punch us through the screen in the face.
I wouldn't blame him.
Michael Brandsegg-Nygard. Is there a chance he ends up in North America?
I'll call it a small chance. I did wonder what his path would be because he was a very unique case in terms of being a high-profile prospect, that he was a late birthday, so it's worth noting he's a year older than most of the kids in this draft, and he was only playing in the Allsvenskan. Like this was my biggest concern about him as a prospect, was just he was an already 18-year-old who had not broken through to the SHL, so in theory, he was almost a full year, almost two behind where Marco Kasper was at the same age. Mind you, completely different players, toolkits, yada, yada, yada. When you get the late birthday, you do get the benefit draft-wise of hopefully being able to speed up the process. Like, Danielson hasn't played a season in the AHL yet, but nobody's going to be surprised if he cracks the NHL roster this year because A, he's good, and B, well, again, he was a late birthday, so he was a year older, and thus you would hope ready that much sooner. I don't think Brandsegg-Nygard has a hope in hell at making the Red Wings this year, but I wouldn't be shocked if they expedited his development into the AHL this year. With where the Red Wings are at in the rebuild, though, and honestly, what they're thinking for this roster this year probably dictates that more than anything, because we've already had 100 lengthy discussions about the backlog of prospects who are going to be ready to go into the NHL. If, multiple of Kasper, Danielson, Mazur don't crack the Red Wings this season in some full-time capacity, you're kicking the MBN rock or can down the road 2 years. Like, you're not going to bring in that many guys, bang, 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 like that. So even though I think his style of game, his age, the maturity that comes with his game, I think he could step into Grand Rapids right now. I just don't see how that timeline works for the Red Wings. So I still fully expect the path being the slow path of one more year in the SHL, let him get his feet wet at the professional level on the bigger ice. And I'd probably consider the SHL a step down from the AHL in terms of competition. So you slow play it 1 year there, 1 year in the AHL, and then we see him in the NHL. One, because that is probably the best course of action for his development. But two, it's also probably the necessary path given where their entire farm system is at.
He's going to most likely be in Sweden with Skelleftea, with Sandin Pellikka. And again, I think that remains the most likely option. But yeah, it goes without saying that he could surprise and make moves. But like you said, Brad, there's a lot ahead of him, and it's a pretty firm ceiling ahead of him that he'd have to break through. You never say never to prospects, and if a guy is good enough where he's going to convince your coaches and your development team and the general manager, then yeah, that's what you do. If a prospect is that good, then you do it. And MBN is coming from, despite all other reports, I think a strong top half of the first round of this draft. And so who's to say he's not as good as a top 10 prospect in other years? And that's the kind of guy who could make the team, or at least the AHL out of the first go. But sending him back to the SHL, no matter how you want to compare them to the AHL, like the SHL is still a quality development year. I agree on play style, though. I think if he does break through and, let's say he has a super impressive camp, because he's going to do Skelleftea's camp first and then come over and do Detroit's camp. And if he...
That's weird, right? That's not normal. Normally, like Sandin Pellikka last year did Skelleftea camp and then just stayed in Sweden.
I think Detroit probably it's a little bit of you want to see more and you want to get him to experience as much of it as possible.
But again, I'm not saying, I know it's different positions, different style of prospects. You have the small defenseman versus the large forward. So it would make sense that from time to draft to time in the NHL, Brandsegg-Nygard would be quicker than Sandin Pellikka. But it is weird that they wouldn't want to give this guy the taste, but they're giving this guy the full training camp right away, despite being involved with literally the same organization.
I wonder how much of that is about two things. One, the player's preference, and because they would communicate to the player, like, hey, here's the most likely outcome, and, maybe you decide. And two, different kinds of players, right? Like Axel Sandin Pellikka, highly talented. We're very excited for him, but for him to come over and play the NHL game, like physically, that is a high demand. And so that's not going to be an easy transition for him to come over. MBN physically wouldn't have as hard of a time. So I wonder if that has to feed into that as well, the difference between those two.
But it does, again, it's weird because what is the Red Wings thought process here? I know we're hypothesizing about what and where he will play next year, but the fact that he's doing this has to at least lend some thought to the Red Wings are thinking about it.
Yeah, that's
like
what
they
I
are
mean.
thinking about sending him to Grand Rapids. Again, most likely probably still just, kicking him back overseas for the year, but they're sending him to Sweden for one training camp, bringing him to North America for another training camp, and then presumably making the decision on where he's playing this year.
Also consider, like, if not that they're the exact same player, but if Marco Kasper makes the Red Wings and let's say an injury happens and Danielson's up or something like that, Grand Rapids is going to want to be replenished too. It's not a 1-to-1 fit, but it's not bad. If you lose Kasper, your Grand Rapids, you say, okay, cool. Now I get MBN, which is he fits in the same bucket. So you have to look at this from a Griffins point of view too.
It'd be the first time MBN's really stacked up against prospects and NHL caliber players. So they might just want to bring him over to say, hey, where is this guy at? Mm-hmm. We have an idea based on his peers in his draft, a little bit at the development camp. Maybe now they want to see how he stacks up against Dylan Larkin, Lucas Raymond, how he plays going against, I say, NHL caliber defense. I feel like that's a compliment. But see how he stacks up going against NHL
It's optimistic.
Yeah.
You have your,
a good guy, I guess.
You have your angle this summer.
Yeah. So, maybe that's what they want to do too. And then they get a better set of data against every sort of different level of competition that they can produce and then decide what they want to do with them.
Important to note, Michael Brandsegg-Nygard's contract can be technically eligible for a contract slide twice. So he's 18. His contract can be, set as a contract slide for the first 2 years before his ELC actually kicks off. And that just depends on how many NHL games that he plays in a given season. So that is a little quirk of his contract because of his age and when he was drafted, but just good to know. Anyhow, I think it's good to look forward to prospects and seeing them sooner in any capacity. I know it's always usually the right decision to let them take their time, and if that means going back to Sweden, that's great. The Red Wings with Håkan Andersson and Nick Kronwall and Nick Lidstrom and everyone over in Sweden have a great development team there, and the teams over in the SHL are excellent, but it's cool to see people over in North America sooner. So if that is a chance with MBN, I'd certainly love to see it. Now let's talk about NHLers and talk about NHL caliber defensemen, one of the only ones that the Red Wings are really boasting about. And at forward, Lucas Raymond, who's the future of the Red Wings forwards, those two are still restricted free agents without contracts, and that's not done yet. And you said last episode, Brad, you're not concerned yet, but it's still notable that this isn't done yet. My conjecture, like what I can draw from this, is this isn't an easy negotiation because the cap is going up and these are star players who are wanting to take advantage of the cap going up. Steve Yzerman has said his preference with Lucas Raymond is to go long term, and I think logic dictates that he would like to do that with Mo Seider as well. And it's commonly accepted knowledge that if you have a star player who's only getting better, you sign him for as long as you can in general. And if Yzerman's saying his preference is to go long term and that's not done yet, then is this a term debate? Is this just the fact that Yzerman grinds his guys? Is this, AAV? What is the holdup and what's the level of concern for Red Wings fans?
To the 3 points you raised, the answer is yes to all of the above. How far apart is the question? Have they agreed on AAV yet? Probably not, because if they haven't agreed on the term yet, there's no way they could have agreed on AAV. And, deadlines force decisions, and there is no deadline anywhere in the near future. They have lots and lots of time to hammer this out. Yzerman's a grinder. Raymond and Seider probably are weighing all their options. I don't think it's nothing that Yzerman said he'd like to go long-term in public, because it's kind of deferring to the player going, hey, everybody knows what we want now. So if we end on a 3-year contract, they're going to know that wasn't us. And that's a smart play. And it's good to know as content creators that where we thought the Red Wings would be at is in fact correct.
Yeah.
For once, we can predict that.
Yeah. Careful. It's still very early, but yeah.
Yeah, no, this is absolutely ending on a 1-year contract for each of them, just because.
No, shut up, I'll punch you. I don't care if this is our last one before we enter our offseason. I will hit you.
Imagine the Mitch Marner discourse, but with Red Wings constantly, every year.
Oh, I'm actually going to strike him, Evan. I'm going to hit him.
Please.
I'm just preparing you for the worst, and anything better than that, you feel at least some sense of relief.
Go on.
Anyways. Yeah, I'm not concerned. I don't think anything that's happened yet is surprising. I think the most surprising thing is the fact that Yzerman said anything at all about the negotiation publicly. Even the I'd like to go long-term feels like 100 times more than what he usually gives us. So it's good to have a baseline. And yeah, in the modern day NHL, some younger players are willing to bet on themselves. And I don't know if Raymond and Mo are heavily in that camp or not. Look at all the Leafs guys. It paid off for every one of them. And Jason Robertson in Dallas is not far away from getting an absolute haul because he did the 3-year contract as well. So from a player's perspective, it makes a ton of sense to go short term. From a team perspective, it makes a ton of sense to go long term. So yeah, this is not a straightforward negotiation. And that's not even factoring in where are the Red Wings actually at in their rebuild, and how does the team's timeline influence what Yzerman wants to do, and how does that influence what the players want to do. I am not going to get into that because this negotiation's complicated enough and my head hurts.
If you look at what has sunk the Toronto Maple Leafs other than just being professional losers, genuinely, like, they had the star power and a lot of the lineup that you needed to win, or at least do better than they did. The defense and the goaltending were always suspect, but they had the forward capacity and the ability and the firepower to just overwhelm teams offensively, and you just never saw that in the playoffs. I think it's written in Craig Custance' new book, which we're excited to read, that Dubas regrets the handling of the big three's contracts. Marner, Matthews especially, and Nylander. And we said at the time it was happening, and as those contracts played out, the Leafs didn't get an inch back from them. Yes, Matthews is kind of an exception. Like, he's a generational goal scorer, and it's way too early to project. But if you think anyone has a chance at Ovi's eventual record, it's going to be him. But still, they walked themselves essentially right to unrestricted free agency. They didn't give a penny back in AAV. They got everything that they wanted. They bent the Leafs over a barrel. Like, there's not really any take back for the team there to be able to construct the rest of the roster. And that is a really damaging thing when you can go from the highest highs of having these star players on RFA contracts to, oh, you are now completely burned way sooner as if you were paying UFA prices. So, you know, for all the complaints that Yzerman grinds his guys and why doesn't he grind UFAs as much, I think that's all irrelevant. I think with these contracts, you said a couple episodes ago, I think, Brad, the summer, the offseason is going to be dictated by how these contracts come in. And Steve Yzerman knows how monumental these two contracts are to the rest of the team's cap structure. Larkin's taken care of. You have DeBrincat set for a little while here, but the core three, Larkin, but then Raymond and Seider, that's your future. So you have to, as an organization, get some, measure or purchase back in these contracts to allow yourselves to build the rest of the roster. And if you cook yourself like Kyle Dubas did with the Leafs, you're kind of shit out of luck. You're relying on a hero run of goaltending essentially to get anywhere.
Well, branching back to that point that I referenced a few episodes ago about those contracts dictate the summer. Now that we know how free agency went, yeah, it's all on those contracts because we're going into next season with about the same roster. Yeah, there was some turnover, but it was a net break even in all likelihood. So you did not progress this team any closer to the playoffs this season, which is okay if it's a very positive summer for the future. You can classify that as, okay, they left some spots open for some prospects in the lineup. That's towards the future. Sure. But the big point on that now will be, are these long-term contracts for Mo Seider and Lucas Raymond? Because if they get both of them on 8-year deals, 7-year deals with, it doesn't even have to be a steal. Reasonable AAVs.
It can be an overpay if you're paying them 8 years.
Yeah. Reasonable AAVs. It's a win. It's a net win for the summer, even if the Red Wings regress in the standings next year, because the most important years have been a net win. And lots of time for that to play out still. But the Red Wings are in the position now where if we come back on 2 or 3 year deals for both of these guys, this summer's a net loss.
It's going to be tough to predict the AAV because, like Brad said, the term is the big thing that everyone's paying attention to here. But if you look at Evolving Hockey's contract projections, which we really like to because it's a really good measure of just generally where the market is at. They don't pretend to be completely, crystal ball, we're 100% right predictors, but it's a good feel for where things would go. So they have the most likely terms for Raymond and Seider as 7 and 6 years respectively, but the probabilities are spread out all across the board here. An 8-year term for Raymond is projected at 8.866 per year. Moritz Seider, 8.495. 7 years is 7.766 for Raymond and Seider, 7.331, and it goes down from there. All of this is like there's variation in here. That to me even feels low. Like you can come in the 9s for either player on an 8-year deal, and I'd feel completely comfortable with that. But yeah, there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. The pie in the sky best possible scenario here is 7 or 8 year deals. If you want to go lower than that, there's options for bridge contracts, but then you have to start dancing around how many RFA years are going to be in the contract after that. How many UFA years are you going to allow yourself to buy? When are they going to be able to walk themselves to unrestricted free agency? You don't want to bring them right to the door. Like you don't want walking them right to unrestricted free agency upon expiry of that RFA contract that's painful. Like it's hard to imagine how that would be, a positive next contract. But at the same time, like the longer the term, the better.
In simplistic terms, getting it done now just saves you on the AAV. You're right about all those other factors, but would you rather pay 8 years of $9 million for Lucas Raymond now, or imagine they do a 3-year bridge deal. He puts up another couple 70-something point seasons and then an 80-plus point season, and the cap's gone up by however many percent. Congratulations. Now you're paying him almost 11. Like it's the way of the world in the rising cap. And man, because this is where my brain just is in that it does not compute, because if I'm Raymond or Seider, no chance I'm asking for anything more than 3 years because I want all that cap raise money.
Mm-hmm. The cap going up by big jumps is another factor to this, which is always implied, but still you have to acknowledge it.
And if I'm Steve Yzerman, I'm looking at those cap jumps and going, there's no way I'm signing you short term. And then you walk right into this stalemate that might end on a 5 or a 6 year deal because they can't come to terms on either of those. And who knows what those AAV looks like. Every year option is on the table for me because I just don't see how both sides can walk into this and go, this is exactly what we wanted.
A popular discussion is bridging bad versus 8 years. And I think relatively speaking, as we just said, the longer the term, the better for both. But is bridging bad? And I used to think most likely yes, but there's been a lot of discussion, and I can now be convinced on at least Seider that bridging might not be the worst case scenario, because in general, if you bridge, you're risking, like you said, Brad, the player getting substantially better, putting up really good performances, the cap is higher, and you're having to pay more. Who's closer to their ceiling right now, Seider or Raymond?
That's tough to say, because what are you basing it on? I think Seider's closer to his ceiling right now, but because of his usage, it's really hard to determine what that is. And also, you have to look at market inefficiencies right now. I think the way the market is played out right now, there is way too heavy of a premium on defense, And I think there's a lot of wingers coming at bargains. You know, you look at Kevin Fiala and Matt Boldy and Tim Stützle. Those are downright bargains for what those guys are. I would say capitalize on that market inefficiency on Lucas Raymond right now.
Stützle plays center too when he wants to. So
yeah, either way. So I think that's where you have to capitalize the most. I'd be more okay with a bridge on Seider because I could at least see you're hoping that market craziness on defense kind of calms down a little bit. I don't think that's ever going to happen, but there's a chance.
I think the market has been crazy on defense, especially right
Forever.
since I was born. Like,
Yeah,
I can't remember a year where it wasn't.
I don't think it's going to happen, but I do know for a player like Raymond, they are cheaper than they should be right now, and you should probably strike while the iron's hot.
I think the Red Wings will also want Edvinsson and Axel Sandin Pellikka to start coming in the lineup so that they can say, hey, Seider, you're not the only guy here anymore that we can trust to play big minutes. So that's why a bridge kind of makes sense to me. You know, that gives them a couple of years of room to do that development. Edvinsson gets his foot in the door and he starts to develop into maybe a 1B type defenseman. And then they can just say to Seider, hey, like, we've got your counterpart now. Like, we don't need to pay you like a 1A defenseman anymore.
It's actually a really good point. And Claude Lemieux, who's Mo Seider's agent, which we repeat that a lot, but it always tends to surprise people. And yes, it's the very same Claude Lemieux. Yeah, he's talking about his deployment. He's saying Mo Seider is shouldering the world right now. So why on earth would you have any leverage in this? So yeah, that's for the Red Wings to build a complement of players around him. It's not just to say, like, you're not the only one who we can rely on, but it's also we're going to have to pay these guys too eventually. And if you want to be on a winning team, then this is what we need you to do. You need to give back a little bit. And for what it's worth, not that you would expect them to say anything different, but if you look at other markets, sometimes players do say things a little different. Seider and Raymond have expressed only wishes to be Red Wings for their entire careers to this point. Again, you'd be shocked to hear anything else, but you've seen even RFA negotiations go nasty elsewhere when it's young stars like that. So there's not a lot of concern there. And that also removes, again, the worry of offer sheets, if there was any. Not that the NHL's fun enough to do offer sheets off the table too. I think it would have to be a shocking number. And at that point, you're saying, well, what team who can afford it is giving up 4 first-round picks, you know? So the timeline to be worried to me is it's still way, way too early. As you can see, the scope of this is so broad. I think the longer you go, and this is a guess, but I feel pretty strongly about this, the longer you go, the more likely these are to be non-long-term contracts. But there are a million different shapes and forms this could take, as Brad mentioned. Moving on here. Jacob Trouba. Just a small update. More reporting out of New York, and this has all been assumed to date, but yeah, it does look like Jacob Trouba put Detroit on his no-trade list. Not a surprise, otherwise the trade likely would have happened by now, but he exercised the right given to him by his contract, and he made the strategic choice to say, well, I don't want to be traded at all, so I'm going to put all the teams likely to be able to trade for me on that list, and Detroit's on there. So,
and the takes that were flying were hot after that came out online. Like, it was the number one part of this story the week before was he doesn't want to be traded because of his wife's residency in New York. Full stop, that's it. And then when people found out Detroit was on his no-trade list, oh, how could he not want to go home? As if the fact that it was Detroit had anything to do with it.
You could live anywhere in North America if you're a star athlete. I get why people want to play in their hometown because it's their team they grew up cheering for. But why the hell would you want to do that?
Well, I think there's people on both sides of it. There's the U's and then there's the DeBrincats, but people always forget that the other half exists.
Because I do have...
What other half?
The DeBrincats.
I know, I'm kidding.
Oh.
I have been.
Oh, yeah.
Had a caught.
Oh my God. Oh,
that's great.
To Evan's point, I have actually talked to an NHLer off the record from Toronto who said he would never, ever, ever in a million years play for the Leafs. And he's not a small-time NHLer. Let's just put it that way. But also, even that kind of misses the point of what this whole Trouba thing was. He does not want to leave New York because his wife still has a year on her residency at a hospital in New York. His trade list, I can almost guarantee with certainty, was these are the 15 teams most likely to trade for me. And the other 17 don't have the cap space or a need for me. So this is my way of ensuring I stay in New York. Do not care about what locations or teams or franchises were on his trade list, other than he probably looked at cap space and need and went them.
Yep. Told his agent, get a read on the situation, figure it out, protect me. GMs, if you don't want players turning down your trades to save your cap structure, be more responsible with your contracts. Whether it was you or the GM before you or whatever it was, like that.
It feels like we're seeing more and more of it. The players really exercising their right on their no trade or no move. So I would only imagine that they're going to become more and more rare.
Yeah. Just a quick note on Trouba. All right, last thing on the Red Wings is you're now looking at, lineup projections, and I linked it last episode, and I'll do it again this episode. Max did his first prediction at what the Red Wings lineup could look like, and I just want to think about the forwards here. Max had it listed as DeBrincat, Larkin, Raymond first line, Tarasenko, Compher, Kane second line, and I think that's what a lot of people naturally fall on. And a couple things come to mind is first, Detroit, tale as old as time. They're talented center depth is always going to be a question. I'm a big JT Compher guy, but when you look at wingers like Kane and Tarasenko, and you look at how Compher and Kane worked or didn't work together last season, I wonder about that line makeup. I wonder if Kane needs Larkin, and I also wonder if Lucas Raymond showed enough last year to say, yeah, he could drive his own line. And maybe be on that line with Compher and whoever else, Tarasenko on that side.
You got to deal with the things that you know first. Like, what can we speak about in line projections with any sense of certainty? The usual answer to that, especially when you have new additions like Vlad Tarasenko, is not very much. But the one thing we do know, DeBrincat, Larkin, Raymond works. They were a phenomenal line last year. They were an upper half of the league first line last year. When was the last time you could say that about the Red Wings outside of like a 5-game stretch? We're talking Datsuk Zetterberg era.
Well, the Bertuzzi era had some lines as well with Bertuzzi Larkin.
For longer than 5 games.
Brad, when can you say anything positive about the Red Wings for longer than 5 games over the last decade?
DeBrincat, Raymond, Larkin last year.
Yeah.
So it would make sense to parade that out because you can say again, hockey's random. Things stop working, things start working all the time. But you can say with some confidence that line will probably get going at some time early in the season. We don't know what Tarasenko, Kane, Compher could be. In theory, it's a line that makes sense. And again, we've said that about a million lines in the past that didn't end up working. But you can see the logic of Tarasenko, elite shooter. Kane, elite playmaker. Neither of them have a defensive bone in their body. But what's JT Compher's calling card? 200-foot center, can do it all. So you can see the makeup of a line that makes sense. On the ice, it might not do anything of substance, but I think that's probably what you start with because, again, at least you have one known in there.
I just worry. Sorry, I shouldn't say worry. I just wonder, though, are you trying to fill out an equation with that to say, yes, offensive guy with no defense and a guy who can play defense just to make sure that's covered? Because in general, you still want your centerman to be a facilitator of some sort. So if it's not the kind of guy who's going to mesh with the Kane's talent or Kane's the way he plays and paces the puck, what are you hoping for after that? Because there's what are your other options? Joe Valendo's not going to do it. Andrew Kopp's not going to do it. Is Nate Danielson going to make the team? And
maybe the answer is Marco Kasper. I know it sounds crazy.
It does.
But maybe it is.
I still think that I'm not saying it's guaranteed to fail, but I'm saying if that doesn't work out, I still think they look at Lucas Raymond first to shake things up and drive offense on a line.
The real answer here is they're going to shuffle it all year. We're going to see both. if we're talking in the majorities, what my tiebreaker would be as to how you're going to build these lines, there's a long-term future with Larkin and Raymond on the same line.
Mm-hmm.
Kane, we love the guy, and he's going to be sick for a couple more years still, but he doesn't have a long-term future with the Wings. If you want anybody building chemistry with Larkin, Lucas Raymond's the guy you handpick on this roster to do it because A, he's good enough to do it, and B, he's got a lot more runway on this team than DeBrincat or Tarasenko or Kane.
You're kind of locked into just a couple options to start, but yeah, I think you're right, Brad. I think you just shuffle and see what lands the best, and you balance out how good is that first line and how much is the second line holding up or struggling or whatever. And if you strike gold with chemistry on the second line, then amazing. And in terms of the bottom six, I think it's fairly straightforward at that point. You have enough defensive options. If Berggren does indeed find his way into the lineup, then you have, guys who can score down the lineup. We'll see how, Cop seasons go, whether he ends up staying at center or if he flips to the wing. And then if at all any of the young guys, Danielson, Kasper, anyone else, Mazur, make the lineup and push anyone else out. Injuries are going to throw all this off. And then for defense, we've said it a million times, but it's really just a question of how good can Simon Edvinsson be in his first full season. I still think by the end of it, he ends up on that first pair with Seider, unless Chiarot Seider works out really, really great, which at points last year, it was way better than the first time around. I think the Red Wings really will love to make sure that they don't have to deploy Jeff Petrie as a second pair right D, unless, he's paired with Edvinsson and that pairing is working out incredibly well and it kind of helps deploy Petrie a little bit, but he's not getting younger, right? So you don't want him playing second pair minutes. Petrie third pair, people were angry to hear it last year, but Petrie third pair, fine.
Save the season.
Save the season. If they made the playoffs, I would have been playing that clip on repeat.
Yep.
Petrie second pair was like, it was very much the Glendening Helm latter years where they still had to play them in the top six and everyone was mad at them. And you're like, well, they're being asked to do more than they reasonably should. The defense is, Evan's laughing. Yeah. It's going to be dictated by Edvinsson, and it's going to be, to a degree, dictated by how the newcomers in Gustafsson and maybe Johansson can do. Gustafsson will have his roster spot. If Johansson can break through and impress, that would actually shake things up for the better in a big way.
I think we've been framing this conversation wrong the whole time listening to you talk there. The question shouldn't be, is Edvinsson ready for a Seider-Edvinsson first pairing? The question should be, are we ready for a Chiarot Petrie second pair?
If Edvinsson starting on the third pair or the first pair?
I think he's going to start on the second pair. I think because Petrie's not good, but him and Edvinsson were passable last year.
They worked pretty decently.
And it didn't work well, but we've seen a lot of Chiarot Seider in the past, so I got to think they're going to go back to that. And that's probably, God, this is a depressing statement. That's probably the best you can do with the top four on this D as it stands right now.
You don't know how Eric Gustafsson's going to do with better deployment.
God, I hope so.
Well, that's the hope, right? You hope that Eric Gustafsson can be a
But that's the thing, better deployment. You put him in the top four, that deployment, I feel like, is not going to be conducive to his defensive skill set.
Last episode, folks, we talked a lot about where the success and the failures could come from this lineup, and there's a lot of headroom in terms of what potentially could come for the offense. And for goalies, absolutely, you always know that goalies, if you give yourself a talented enough goalie, or maybe you strike gold with a few talented ones, you can get 82 good games out of them. Detroit has that possibility as well. The defensive upside is, like, we're talking, what is the least bad scenario? Like, Yzerman kind of said when Max asked him the question in the presser, I think it was, like, are you going to put Gustafsson on the right side, or do you think he can play the right side? And Yzerman said, we're going to find out. Like, that's their hope that
he's going to be their plug and play kind of guy.
Yeah.
I'm still in the boat of you just take Albert Johansson and put him in the lineup and see what he's got.
Can't be worse.
If it is, it's like, okay, we know what he is. Honestly, we move on.
They would love if he was on the right side.
The construction of the Red Wings as they are now is probably the best argument I've ever seen this organization have for routinely running an 11-7.
Yeah.
I don't think their bottom six at forward is anything special. You can pull any of those guys out of the lineup at any given moment, and it impacts the team in almost no way. And I think that all of these pairings are going to be bad. So having 7 means you can just roll with whoever happens to be good that given night.
Well, how many preseason games are there now?
500, just about.
90?
The Red Wings maxed out again for some reason.
Because it's a big moneymaker.
Original 6.
It's one of the big ones. They're always going to do that. They're a huge market.
I get it. Doesn't mean I have to like it.
May actually help the Red Wings so they can figure out what the hell to do with their D pairings.
As long as there is this many preseason games to take up, I would like the Red Wings to do so. In general, as a person who covers hockey, I want fewer preseason games, but for this team, you need to figure out who's going to make it and who's not.
Yeah, and the benefit of going 11-7 means you probably then see a regular shift for Albert Johansson rather than spending half the season in Cleary's Cabana.
Maybe someone surprises in camp. Maybe Hall just comes out. No, I'm going to stop.
William Lagesson.
Maybe.
Honestly, it's
the Red Wings are due for something like that on the back end.
We had it. We just traded it to San Jose with a second-round pick.
Oh, yeah, I forgot about that.
Wow, I'm going to move way on to some NHL notes here. I feel like starting an argument, and this is around the cap as well. Barry Trotz was asked if the no-tax states have an advantage, and he says there's no question about it. We've talked about this on previous episodes, and I just wanted to reiterate here. Thank you, Barry Trotz. I've always said you're a real one. It has driven me insane when people thought or said there is absolutely no difference. You don't even need to know tax law to understand why any impression that was put out by others that, you can just have a really good accountant and the taxes end up being all the same. No. That's just not how it works. Opportunity cost. You still get taxed more when you withdraw. It's just not. You make more money on your income by living in a no income tax state, period. There are nuances to it. I don't think it's as exaggerated as people have made it out to be, but it's an advantage, and we're seeing NHL players prefer it depending on the person.
Well, you always knew the no income tax states was a real thing because by and large, in general, all the Canadian teams have the highest income tax because they're in Canada. And what teams are always on no trade list? The Canadian teams.
Yeah. And part of that's because they're insane markets too. Like no one wants to play under the pressure of Toronto or Montreal unless they're sickos. And I'm sorry to say, but it's really hard to convince an NHLer who has a choice between Sunrise, Florida, and Winnipeg, Manitoba.
A lot of hockey players are simple man. They see sun, they want sun.
Who among us,
Yeah.
Is it an advantage that you have to recognize? In my opinion, yes. Is it an advantage that I think the NHL should find a way around at some point? In my opinion, yes. Is there a way to reliably do that isn't just making the cap 17 trillion times more complicated than it already is? That's where I struggle to see the solution. So I'm that person complaining without the solution to the problem, which is, I guess, just classic me. But that's where I run headlong into a wall, because how do you do it?
Well, if the NHL can't lobby for income tax to be adjusted across state and province, which obviously they cannot do.
No.
They have to control what they can do. They can set the boundaries and the rules of the salary cap up to try and even the playing field. So maybe there's first of all, I would just want to say this. I hate the salary cap.
I know.
So before I say something really dumb, my first option is to just get rid of it.
That's going to be one of our Patreon bonus episodes, is us arguing about the salary
cap. And option
cap.
number 2 is maybe you have adjusted salary caps based on income state tax. That sounds ridiculous, and I haven't thought that out at all, but the NHL's got to look at ways that they can control those sorts of constraints.
you're not going to be able to do something like that, even though in theory that is the most obvious and simplest answer. You adjust the salary cap based on that. But then again, as Ryan pointed out, there's a million ways around tax law, and you can refine this, you can tweak that with good accounting, yada, yada, yada. So the players would argue, no, of course not, because I'm not actually going to be paying that. I'm going to be paying this because of this. And it would just be a nightmare of a headache. And thankfully, we as fans wouldn't need to care because Gary Bettman said we don't care. So it wouldn't impact us at all.
Yeah.
I think what you have to do to balance the playing field is reward the teams for the work they do. Like, Winnipeg hasn't won a cup, but they've been a regular playoff team, and they've been to the conference final in Winnipeg, Manitoba. You know, with all due respect to Winnipeg, that might be the least desirable market in the entire NHL, and they can still be consistently good. Why? They draft and develop extremely well. Mark Scheifele, in-house. Nikolai Ehlers, in-house. Kyle Connor, in-house. Connor Hellebuck, in-house. They should be rewarded for that. So my workaround for this has always been you reward the teams who draft and develop good players. You get 1 or 2 contract slots on your team that don't count towards the salary cap.
Franchise tags.
But you had to have drafted them. You couldn't have traded for them. You couldn't have traded for them after they were drafted. So for the Red Wings right now, we could be like, yeah, we can give Seider and Raymond 10 mil because they are not going to count against our cap, right? Whereas now we got to be a little more prudent for agency because we have to eat that no matter what. Dylan Larkin doesn't classify against the cap. So if you have a Florida, and it is worth mentioning as kind of a rebuttal, Florida is a no-tax state, and the Florida Panthers could not get anybody to go there for the better part of 2 decades because they sucked as a franchise. So that still matters.
But now that they have a good operation,
now that they've turned into a good, functional organization, you combine that with the no-tax stuff, and they become a very favorable destination, and they have the advantage. So just because you're in a no-tax state with good weather does not automatically mean you are going to get everybody and you're going to be good. But it is an advantage. So other teams should be given an advantage for the work they do. If you keep missing on draft picks or you develop poorly, you should not be rewarded. You are failing as an organization. Why are we going to reward you? Why should you have an advantage? So to me, that's the counterpoint to that, because now if you are Nashville and Florida and Dallas, and I think Seattle might even be in a no-tax state, you can be the premier organizations, because imagine if you have that no tax and you do draft and develop exceptionally well. Now you have the biggest advantage and you're doing good work, so nobody can say you didn't earn this.
You may also get more opportunities for players to move, because if you can only really nail down 2 players you drafted, you might get other teams in UFA or whatever trying to trade for guys and paying them more because they've now have less salary cap tied up to their superstars, or they're not worrying about, in 4 years, Auston Matthews is going to be coming off the books. We really got to plan for that, so we can't make this trade or can't sign this UFA right now. Not sure GMs really think all that long term, because their careers are, predicated on what they do tomorrow. So, yeah, I think that would be a general starting point for a change.
One thing I want to build off of that was said is, in the past, teams didn't really get star players, even though they're in no income tax states, because they were terrible programs. What I will say is, if you look at the Florida Panthers model, they have an owner, Vinny Viola. What did he do? He just poured money into that program. He made sure they had unreal practice facilities. He made sure that whole, the team, not just them, but their families, the players were all taken care of on and off the ice. He, state of the art, everything. He listened to their feedback. He really, building up the arena and the facilities and the amenities and everything inside and outside of the rink to make it attractive for players to go there, to really build on what you have to offer. And that's going to be a model. And I think you're going to see that happen more and more and more for teams with any kind of leverage, whether it's weather, favorable or no income tax, whatever it might be, because NHL ownership is getting wealthier and wealthier and wealthier. You're running into I think it's a dwindling amount of owners who are setting internal salary caps or who don't have the money, because sports franchise ownership has become such a lucrative business that if you have a single billionaire owning a team anymore, that is actually becoming a little bit more atypical because you're now getting those, multi-investor groups or the conglomerates or what have you. So as more money is poured into the NHL and you can see this model of things that really a lot of other teams can emulate to some degree, you can't take Florida's weather, but still, yeah, you're going to have that option. Also, if you think about expansion, like you look at teams like Houston, like that would be adding another team with a really high probability of being able to leverage this into the fray, which you also wonder how other teams would react to that.
Not favorably.
Revenue sharing too is a funny one. Like, is there a mix in here of revenue sharing that helps make teams feel better? But then that's like, why would the fans care? On the ice, that doesn't make it. We say a million times, we don't cry for millionaires or billionaires. Like, oh, thank God that billionaire got a little bit more money this year. Who cares?
Well, we're out of the era now of just giving Arizona money to keep them afloat.
Yeah.
So it'll be interesting to see how that adjusts over the next few years.
It is weird that Ottawa got new ownership, Arizona moved, and Florida's good. The three biggest problems got resolved in a very short amount of time.
There's a lot of discourse all the time about, is Gary Bettman actually good at his job? And I have a lot of gripes with a lot of the things that Gary Bettman has done. But if you look at it from an owner's perspective, things have gotten better in a lot of ways for the NHL.
My argument against that is it could have got a lot better a long time ago.
Fully agree. I'm not sitting here.
Have you looked at what some of the max deals are in the NBA lately?
Gary Bettman's legacy, it's almost too easy to, like, you can literally show it on a graph. Because again, I always get that image of, I think it was Sports Illustrated after the 94 Cup Finals, why the NHL is hot and the NBA is not. Immediately followed by a lockout. And now, again, a bench player in the NBA makes more than Connor McDavid.
Look, I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm just saying his focus is on the business side, and you get rid of the rot, you get rid of the weak points, and you strengthen your floor. And that's not just improving those teams and helping revenue sharing. So Toronto's not just donating to Arizona like they thought they were going to do when Arizona was going to give Auston Matthews a max offer sheet. It's also going to help expansion fees for the next round of expansion as well.
Could you imagine being like Boston or Toronto? Well, Toronto, for example, they're just all this hockey related revenue. They're just keeping Arizona alive. And then Arizona goes and signs Auston Matthews. How pissed you would be.
Oh my God. I actually wish that would have happened because it would have been hilarious. But yeah, that would have been sickening. Like, oh, I donate to keep you afloat. You pay no one and keep your cap wide open. And all of a sudden you're giving Auston Matthews $15 million to come here.
I would.
Toronto might have done that thing that Formula One teams do all the time, which is just threaten to leave the sport completely.
We're starting our own league.
Yeah. Ferrari used to do that all the time. They'd be like, yeah, fine, we'll go. They'd be like, oh, okay. We'll change the engine rules. You can have your legacy payment. NHL teams are so much, they're not under the thumb of ownership or commissioners, but yeah.
They toe the company line.
Yes, very much so. Okay. So we don't get too far into our offseason. Evan, you and I are itching for that. Is the salary cap good for the league debate? So we'll save that for a different time. Let's jump into overtime. Overtime on this episode of the Winged Wheel Podcast is brought to you by our Patreon supporters. Again, patreon.com/Winged Wheel Podcast if you want to support the show. The bonus overtime episodes, the complete bonus offseason episodes, the Discord, the giveaways. You get access to all of that and lots more. By becoming a patron, you allow us to continue this show through the offseason and continue to make it bigger and better, and allow us to do some of the offseason content that we're planning for not just the patrons, but everyone. You also allow us to produce other great content like Expected by Whom, hosted by Prashant Iyer and Sean Shapiro. You allow us to support the Jamie Daniels Foundation through initiatives like Winged Wheel Podcast Nights in partnership with the Detroit Red Wings and the Grand Rapids Griffins. All of that and lots more. So again, patreon.com/Winged Wheel Podcast if you want to join the Dub Dub Club. Let's take some questions from our patrons. Give Wallman the Heart says, now that it looks like Toronto is running it back, LOL, I feel like Detroit is very well positioned to aggressively pursue Marner as a free agent if it comes to that. Next year, we have Husso, Mata, Petrie, and potentially Kane coming off the books. I believe in the future core of this team, but we still lack a superstar. Am I crazy to say that Yzerman needs to do this or something like this by next summer or the rebuild is in jeopardy?
The only holdup I have on that statement is next summer. But even at then, it's 2-3 years at most. Like, they are on the precipice of they got to make something happen. Otherwise, what are you actually doing? I think next summer is a little too soon to have as the cutoff. But yeah, no, everybody who's been listening for a while knows. I don't care what he's done in Toronto. Mitch Marner is exactly what the Detroit Red Wings need. And if he is sitting there in free agency, yeah, you pay what you have to pay to get him. You have to. And it ties into why the Raymond and Seider contracts are so important, because you need the flexibility for if something like that comes available. And it's a very strong free agent market next summer as is. Most of these guys will end up re-signing with their team. It always happens. But if one or two of them go to market, yeah, the Red Wings need to be all over that.
Pretty much any kind of top six forward that can be had for not just for free and unrestricted free agency, but reasonable assets. Like, you have the assets as a team. You have a dearth of really good prospects, and you're not going to use all of them. So any option that you have to bolster the top six and add actual high-end offense to your lineup, not just short term. I don't mean for a couple of years. I mean, you can probably keep this guy mid to long term. You can have the Marners in at the forefront of your mind. You can have the Rantanens, of course, and those are going to be the name guys, but Yzerman will be going after all of them because that's just what you do, and that's the hole in this lineup right now. I mean, the dream is another top-end center to go 1-2 there, and then you figure out the rest after that by doing whatever you need to do, but whatever high-end offensive firepower you can add there or in the prospect pool.
Like, I'm even on board. It had never happened in a million years. If Yzerman can free up $25 million in cap space next year, buying out, trading out, go for Marner and Rantanen if they're both there. Sign them both. I don't care.
You're not going to become a worse team by doing that.
Yeah, like you're not going to get players like that in the system. You're not going to be drafting high enough, and none of the guys you currently have in the system are going to get even close to that.
Like, and this is a big part of the whole. It drives me insane because, again, the name of the game with where the Red Wings are at is nuance. Has everything gone perfectly well? No, but does the national media who doesn't watch the Red Wings game in and game out and understand what Steve Yzerman walked into, pay attention to what Steve Yzerman walked into, also know, like, all-time bad lineup, horrible roster construction, not so bad that George R.R. Martin, like, it's worse than whatever he's facing that's stopping him from riding the winds of winter. Like, this is a god-awful team that Yzerman had to turn around and got absolutely zero lottery luck.
You know who doesn't care about any of that? The person who's like, how are the Red Wings doing?
Totally.
Oh, they stink. Oh, okay. Well, I'm not going to go to a game.
You're totally right.
And if we had said these things to them, they'd stuff us in our locker.
As we would have deserved.
Yeah.
And that actually is a good explanation of why, and we said it, why did Yzerman hit the gas pedal? Because people just are tired of losing. I'm tired of losing. It sucks. Is there a perfect way to do a rebuild? I don't know. There's a lot of ideas for it, but at some point you just got to be sick and tired of losing for business reasons, for hockey reasons. If you own the team, if you manage the team, you're like, I'm so tired of sucking, and you have to make moves to get past it.
The rebuild might have started for Steve Yzerman when he started the job, but it's been going on for everyone else a lot longer, and we don't even own the team.
No, we just ran out of money the day that they was up for sale.
Check bounced that one day, really sent me back.
We had to buy a couple beers at the course today. Those are all going up in price.
Unbelievable.
When we saw a sign today at the course, Brad, it was a deal for a beer and a burger, $19. I'm like, that's just the price, and not even a good one. What are you putting that up as a deal for? So yeah, no, we can't afford an NHL team. Anyways, are you crazy to say that Yzerman needs to do that or the rebuild is in jeopardy? I don't say he absolutely needs to in the sense that it has to happen, but the general thought of, does Yzerman need to make moves to get around the fact of everything that Brad just said? You need to add those players. Yeah, I think that's the ideal path out of this. The Gyms says, welcome to the longest offseason ever. How would Rasmus Andersson from the Flame fit in this year's Wings? Looks like they're interested in retaining salary and looking for picks and prospects.
He would take one hell of a load off Mo Seider on the right side.
Yeah, it's actually a great point. And he's 27. He'll be 28 around the start of the season. A Swede. So his cap hit is 4.55 according to Puckpedia. And that goes through this season and next season. So there's a couple of years there of certainty. So Claude Lemieux is the agent. I just saw that actually. So that's funny. That's a really good pull.
So we're out.
or in to say, hey, we need to sign your buddy and you're bring over your other client. There you go.
But then again, we're into that conversation of, is it worth giving up a first round pick for someone who's going to very clearly not be here for the window?
Is he not going to, though?
If you're confident you can
resign him,
sure.
Yeah.
But you have to be real confident.
You have a year of runway before you even have to worry about signing the extension, though.
Yeah, and that's the thing is, so how good of a feel for it would you actually have?
This is a bigger discussion, but we are on different sides of that spectrum. Like, you are ultra cautious in that regard, and I am kind of like, yeah, you figure it out as you go. Wolverine Ginger says, who is more likely to make the Wings roster opening night, Danielson or Kasper? Where would they slot in the lineup?
I'll go Kasper 51-49, because Kasper can probably very comfortably slot in on the third line, whereas I would want Danielson in a bigger role, if that makes sense.
Kasper's a year older too, right?
No, he was drafted a year earlier, but Danielson being the late birthday. Kasper's advantage is he has a lot of pro experience, whereas Danielson has almost none. Because I do think Danielson is a better prospect, and as of right now, I don't think it's all that close, but Kasper is just way further ahead in his development because this is what, he's 3 years pro?
Yeah, 5 months separating the two. I think Danielson is likely going to be the better player. He had himself an outstanding camp in preseason last year. I think he could have made the team last year, and so I'm going to give him the edge for that. But Kasper did have a really strong season as it ramped up over time in Grand Rapids, finished strong, and so that maybe could have pushed him over the edge. I'll still say Danielson for the pie-in-the-sky moonshot that you can maybe use him as a centerman on the team, even in a depth role. Okay, we're going to wrap this up and jump into our Patreon exclusive bonus overtime episode. Thank you all so very much for tuning in. Again, we are going to, barring anything happening, a trade, maybe it's the Seider and Raymond signings, whatever it is, we're going to be going down to one episode a week, sticking to weekends. The midweek episodes are going to be, as planned, the bonus off-season episodes for our patrons. So patreon.com/wingedwheelpodcast if you want to support. Thank you to all of you for tuning in. This was a hell of a ride getting into the offseason, one more mountain to climb with everything happening at once, but the offseason is here nevertheless, but we are not going away. If you're a new listener, welcome to the show, and if you're a listener of old, appreciate you tuning in. To all of our patrons, thank you very much. We could not do any of this without you. And to all of our name-level supporters on Patreon, you are the heartbeat of the show. Arjun Shankar, Yves Bartels on behalf of the Sarah Grand Foundation, Akefer, Samuel Soderholm, Icon, Alexander Hansen, Victor Zetterberg, Ghost of OSBP, Glenn Brabham. I owe Glenn an apology. I always post the overtime threads at the wrong time for him. All the Aussies, actually. Speaking of which, Coroner's Left Knee, Ashley Van Conant, Sea Lion, Matthew M. Rice, Admiral Matt S. at the Cheesebag Navy, Carl Bertinanen-Aluski, Carl Provi, Citizen High Five, Clip Clop Nene, Connor Scovey, Craig Kibble, Denny's Gamer Girl, Derek Enstam, Cider, Dickens, formerly Marlon Winchester, Disestablishmentarianism, DJ Denton, Eric Hill, God Creatives, Give Blood Fight Probert, Goose Looney's Drinking Club, Hockeytown Love, Hockeytown Matt, Hassam Al-Qassem, Jay Gollum, Jacob Turner, Jeff Pridemore, Jim Kallenbach, Jonathan Miller, Kalen Wood, Marcus, Marty, Matt Keeler, Matt McKay, Michael Edlund, R.A., Raul Pudd, Riley Enright, Ryan Britt, Scott Martin, Skeletor, Scree and Lube, That's What I Appreciates About You, The Iser Type, Tyler McDowell, Wellman's Elite Dancing D, Iser Plan Stan, Tyler is a brand new name-level supporter, welcome. General Andy Bohan of the Cheesebag Army, Sam Bankson, A.A. Ron, A.B., Adam Rose, All Motor No Hands, Axel Sandin Pellikka, Bellingham Acid Balls, Chimkim Nutgets, Chuck Buff Chest, the Tarpless Goon, Commander Ben Baird of the Cheesebag Space Force, Connor Layton and Corey Prida, Darren Fick, Dangleberries, D-Bots, Eric Nance, Frank Stanley, Gene Sullivan, Griffey Boy, Ian, James Pridemore, Jeremiah Dobo, JM Rhapsody, Joe and Reese's Pickle and Boot Shop, brand new name-level supporter, Joey Jojo Shabadoo, John Evans Derogatory, John Ingalls, Josh Yelton, Keenan O'Donohue, Brad is Wrong and Plays Like Sprong, Kevin McCracken, Quaz, Les Grossman's Ungodly Firestorm, Linda Hull, Michigan Boy in Avs Country, Ophelia, running for mayor in Evansville, Wyoming, Steven, the Hodag, the Hat 123, Trent Thorough, Wings and Pizza, great callback, Wings fan in St. Louis, Scott, and your second favorite patron. Thank you all so very much. Welcome to the offseason.
Thanks for tuning in to the Winged Wheel Podcast. Be sure to check out wingedwheelpodcast.com, where you can subscribe to the show on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. You'll also find links to other ways to support the show, such as Patreon, official podcast apparel, and more. And don't forget to follow the show on Twitter at Winged Wheel Pod. And of course, the hosts at Brad Crisco, at Ryan Hanna WWP, and at Hockey Town Evan.